Sometimes the greatest discoveries are the results of considerable planning, preparation, and intent. Columbus was sailing west across the Atlantic and encountering new lands even if they weren't part of the far edge of Asia, as he had expected Fabian von Bellingshausen and Mikhail Lazarev, German and Russian navigators, respectively, to go south in 1820 in search of conclusive proof that the long-mooted but never-seen southern continent actually existed and lay eyes on Antarctica. Others, though, are the product of happenstance. Witness the case of Cantre'r Gwaelod, or the Lowland Hundred, to use the English expression. A Welsh take on the myth of the vanished city of Atlantis. This was once, as folklore has it, a fertile tract of low-lying land, extending 20 miles west of the shoreline of Cardigan Bay, but later lost to the tides of the Irish Sea. Found by chance. 8 world wonders discovered by accident. Does this old tale bear any relation to the 2-mile plain of petrified trees, some up to 4,500 years old, uncovered off the coast of Cardigan between the villages of Borth and Enislas? If so, the finding is down not to years of careful study or the twinkling of archaeological intuition but to the winds of Storm Hannah, which exposed the stumps, preserved in peat, at the end of April. Of course, in many cases, discoveries are made by forces far less random than the angrier extremes of British weather: a teenage stone thrower, a farmer with a spade, a tumbling donkey. The following places and cultural delights and, in one example, a person were all brought back into the light by chance moments and the soft murmuring of fortune. Number 8. The grave of Matthew Flinders. The grave of Matthew Flinders was discovered by archaeologists combing the former gardens and graveyard attached to the Church of St. James's Piccadilly as recently as January this year. Why the upheaval? Preparation work for the controversial high-speed 2 HS2 railway line that is due to link London and Birmingham when the first stage of work is finished in 2026. What was found was the grave of a navigator who was still hugely respected in both the UK and Australia, which he explored so successfully but whose final resting place had been lost since the middle of the 19th century. Lincolnshire-born but unable to resist the call of the ocean, Matthew Flinders charted the coastline of Australia in depth between 1791 and 1810, completing a circumnavigation in 1802 and 1803 that confirmed that this vast chunk of land in the southern hemisphere was indeed an island. 2 centuries on, several parts of its landscape are still named after him, including the Flinders Ranges mountains of South Australia and the coastal town of Flinders in Victoria. Flinders himself had been a little harder to find. He died in 1814, aged 40, but the burial ground where he was interred was remodeled in the years afterwards, and by the time it ceased to be used in 1853, the site of his grave had been lost. His sister-in-law, paying a visit a year earlier, had been unable to locate it. It was only when archaeologists were called in this year that his coffin was found. Happily, the decision in 1814 to pay for a lead plate for the casket, a relative luxury, proved to be a sound investment 205 years later. His name was still legible on it, whereas the tin plates on the coffins of the adjacent dead had long shed the identities of their owners. Yet, a decision is still to be taken on where Flinders will be reburied, although it is likely he will be afforded a more prominent location than the one he has enjoyed for the past 2 centuries. For now, a bronze statue of him crouched down over a map of Australia, forged to commemorate the 200th anniversary of his death in 2014, can be seen close to the graveyard in Euston Railway Station. Number 7. The Venus de Milo. The Venus de Milo, Greece, France, discovered by Theodorus or Yorgos Kentrotas, a villager on the Greek island of Milos, then part of the Ottoman Empire, who encountered what is undisputedly considered one of the greatest jewels of Greek civilization, on April 8, 1820. He found the statue in a buried niche in the ruins of ancient Milos, in the village of Tripoli, or, in another version, while digging in his own field to unearth stones for construction. At least, that's one story. Another names Yorgos Batanis and his son Antonio as the discoverers of the remains of an ancient theater. The 19th century author Paul Carus wrote that the men came accidentally across a small cave, carefully covered with a heavy slab and concealed, which contained a fine marble statue in 2 pieces, together with several other marble fragments. This happened in February 1820. Either way, the finding was significant. What was found was a masterpiece carved by the Hellenistic sculptor Alexandros of Antioch, sometime between 130 and 100 BC. The statue is generally thought to represent the Greek goddess of love, Aphrodite even though she has come to wear the name of her Roman counterpart, Venus though she might also be Amphitrite, a goddess of the sea and a consort of Poseidon, who was worshipped on Melos. Whatever her precise identity, she is clearly the work of a skilled craftsman, all smooth stone and calm demeanor. She is also, at 6 feet 8 inches, slightly larger than life. The question of what happened to her arms, her left is missing entirely, her right is shorn just above the elbow, remains, but their absence does nothing to diminish her cool magnificence. The version of the discovery tale involving Theodorus Kentrotus has it that a French naval party was on Melos at the time, searching for antiquities. Kentrotus's happy accident was, apparently, noted immediately, with the statue being purchased from the Ottoman authorities for a token amount. Venus was promptly shipped to Paris, where she has stood tall in the Louvre ever since. Number 6. The Lascaux Cavalry. The Lascaux Cave, France, discovered by Marcel Ravadat, an 18-year-old Frenchman who made the discovery on September 12, 1940, when his dog fell through a hole into the cave complex below. He returned with 3 friends, Jacques Marcel, Georges Agnel, and Simon Coencas, the 4 of them thinking they had found a secret passageway into a nearby manor house. Instead, they had stumbled on arguably the planet's best example of prehistoric cave art. Some 600 paintings, many of them incredibly detailed, recreate horses, bulls, stags, bison, and other creatures of Europe's plains from millennia past. The area now known as the Hall of the Bulls is particularly glorious, containing a depiction of a bull, which, at 17 feet (5.2 meters) long, is the largest known version of such an animal in prehistoric art. Academic discussion has been ongoing almost from the moment of discovery, but it is believed that the works are about 17,000 years old and the product of several generations of creative labor. The site has been UNESCO listed since 1979. The carbon dioxide from visitors gazing at the paintings soon began to cause damage, and the cave was closed to the public in 1963. Tourists are now directed to a fabulously designed replica, which gives a clear idea of the splendor of the original look. The museum complex is in Montignac, near Périgueux, in the Dordogne department of France. Number 5. The Catacombs of Qam el-Shoghafa. The Catacombs of Qam el-Shoghafa, Egypt. According to legend, a donkey fell down an access shaft into this long-lost burial complex in the Egyptian second city of Alexandria in 1900. What was found? Alexandria has a close association with the history of Egypt and retains an air of mystery as the reputed location of not just 1 but 2 lost tombs of formidable ancient rulers. According to some sources, Alexander the Great was reburied somewhere in the vicinity of the city in the early 3rd century BC, having been moved from his initial resting place in Memphis, the ruins of which are near modern-day Giza. 3 centuries later, Cleopatra and Mark Antony were similarly interred, the 2 lovers committing suicide after losing their power struggle with Rome in 30 BC. Hidden down a dusty backstreet in downtown Alexandria, the Catacombs of Qam el-Shoghafa contain neither of these misplaced mausoleums, but this labyrinth has built up a healthy mythology nonetheless, not least because it looks like a suitable burial site for royalty. Elaborate carvings of Egyptian and Roman deities guard chambers where ornate sarcophagi have been found, while a spiral staircase, cut down through the bedrock, leads you into the gloom. The fact that this maze probably dates to the 2nd century AD, and was probably built for a wealthy but now unknown family, is an inconvenient truth. Both Alexander and Cleopatra were long dead by the time it was carved. Even so, it is a majestic slice of heritage whose own legend is enhanced by the fact that, when it fell out of use in the 4th century AD, it was itself lost to sight for some 1600 years. Number 4. The Dead Sea Scrolls, Palestine and Israel. The Dead Sea Scrolls discovered by Muhammad Eddib, a Bedouin shepherd, and close friends Jumma Muhammad and Khalil Musa, who were herding their goats near the settlement of Ain Feshka in the Judean desert, on the north shore of the Dead Sea in the Palestinian territories. It was 1946, and Eddib was a teenager. He would later recall throwing stones into what are now known as the Qumran caves and being surprised to hear the sounds of pottery smashing. On closer investigation, he and his companions would find a series of papyrus and parchment scrolls, and a scholarly whirlwind would begin. Manuscripts of huge religious significance, variously carbon dated to between the 5th century BC and the 4th century AD, complement or run alongside the books of the Bible. Debate on the precise contents and authorship of the scrolls has raged almost from the moment of discovery, with the 7 scrolls initially found by the shepherds being supplemented by archaeological excavations of the caves over the next decade, resulting in a collection of 981 different parchments. The vast majority of the scrolls are now housed in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, while the caves are safeguarded as Qumran National Park in Palestine, but managed by Israel. Number 3. Villa Poppaea, Italy. Villa Poppaea discovered by 16th-century engineers doing preparatory work on a canal linked to the river Sarno. They cut into the central hull of a giant subterranean villa, which, like the Domus Aurea, was probably the property of Nero. The Villa Poppaea was a seaside home on what is now the Neapolitan Riviera, in the modern town of Torre Annunziata, but was then the ancient Roman settlement of Atlantis. The house is thought to have been used as a second residence by the emperor's second wife, Poppaea Sabina. Hence the name. Another sublime fragment of the 1st century AD, like the rather more faded Pompeii and Herculaneum, which the ancient town lay between, Atlantis was engulfed by the tumult of ash and lava that spewed from Mount Vesuvius during the cataclysmic eruption of 79 AD. Studies have suggested that the oldest parts of the villa date to the middle of the 1st century BC, while others show signs of renovation, probably in the wake of the earthquake that ripped through the area in 62 AD. Its tribulations did at least ensure that much of it survived. Its frescoes were preserved by their layers of volcanic protection, while the gardens, fully excavated, have learned to bloom again. The villa is now protected as part of the Pompeii portfolio of sites. Number 2. Domus Aurea, Italy. Discovered by a young man falling down a small chasm in the Italian capital's Esquiline Hill at the end of the 15th century. In doing so, he dropped into the Golden House, the cavernous edifice that Nero, one of the most infamous of the emperors of ancient Rome, had constructed for himself at the height of his power. The frescoes found within sparked a rush of interest. Artists such as Raphael and Michelangelo crawled underground to peer at the painted wonders of the 1st century AD. They even carved their names into the wall as proof of their presence. A colossal complex that had been both one of Rome's most glorious palaces and one of its greatest sources of shame, all within the space of a few years. Most historical sources depict Nero as both a ruthless tyrant and a man of enormous self-indulgence. Not only was the Domus Aurea conceived as a gleaming self-tribute, work on it began in 64 AD, when the notorious Great Fire, which had all but devoured the city in the same year, had barely been extinguished, but Nero would be gone almost as soon as it was completed. He died in 68 AD, killed by one of his entourages in an act of assisted suicide, as he was about to be overthrown. The Julio-Claudian dynasty died with him, and with the brandishing of new brooms that inevitably followed, the Domus Aurea and the man it represented were swiftly swept away. The grounds and buildings were filled with earth and covered over, and other grand structures were built on top, such as the Baths of Titus, the Baths of Trajan, and the Flavian Amphitheater. Ironically, this rough treatment would help preserve the palace's artworks under many layers of dirt. The 5 centuries since it was rediscovered have not been kind to the Domus Aurea. Many of the frescoes that so delighted Raphael have faded, and there are fears that the weight of buildings and the earth above the complex could cause it to cave in. It has been closed for regular restorations for the last decade. It is, however, accessible strictly by guided tour. Its size is such that it still hasn't been fully excavated. A Sphinx room, covered with wall paintings in remarkable condition, was found by archaeologists at the end of 2022. Number 1. The Terracotta Army, China. The Terracotta Army discovered by Yang Jufa, plus 5 of his brothers, and his friend Wang Puji, farmers all, who were digging a well during a drought in April 1974. They were about a meter down into the earth at Lishan, near the city of Xi'an in China's central Shaanxi province, when their tools struck a series of pottery heads and bronze arrows. The local museum curator, Zhao Kengman, told the farmers to stop their work immediately. He knew that the area in which they were working was in the vicinity of the tomb of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. The mausoleum in question, which was constructed between 246 and 208 BC and sits under a 76-meter mound, was well inked on the map. What was found to lie beneath the soil was not. Archaeological excavations would uncover 7,000 statues of terracotta warriors and horses, as well as some 100 wooden chariots, all designed to protect Qin in the afterlife.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on future videos. Your support means a lot.